So this is about growth and decay, and if you wanted to say this is growth that is growing a lot, you might say it's 10% growth. So you remember those problems from yesterday where we would say u sub n is equal to u sub n minus 1, and then we would multiply by something? When I multiplied by 1.06, that made it grow or decay? You tell me. Grow. By what? By 6%. Makes it grow by 6%. Now, this will be a little harder, but you can handle it. I know this first answer is easy. 0.97. Does that make it grow or decay? Decay by what percent? 3% decay. You get that? That's fundamentally all that we're doing different. Is we're going to have real world problems that are going to start with u sub 0 because you want to start with some amount before time begins. Like when I bought my new car, it was about $60,000. I had never spent that much before in my life for a car, but I decided I was going to go for it. So I bought this car for $60,000. Do I want to think that the car is just going to stay the same value? No, I know it's going to decay. So after 1 year, u sub 1, notice u sub 0 is how I started. After 1 year, and I get to u sub 1, the car has gone down, so it's definitely multiplying by a decimal. But I think it was more like it went down at least 20%. So 0.8. Oh, do you get how that's 20% decay? Okay. Would you be able, do you still remember how to put that in a calculator? Don't do it yet. Wait, don't move. Don't go grab your calculator. Don't, just wait. The first line on the calculator says n min, and that's always a stumper for people. They're like, what does that mean? This is the n. N min means what's your smallest n. So it's really asking, did you start with u sub 0 or did you start with u sub 1? It even defaults to a 1 right there in your calculator. For today, you will have to change that because we're going to have all real world problems and we're always going to start with u sub 0. So the n min is going to be 0. Then it says u parenthesis n. And if you're smart, you left in your equation from yesterday, which was a lowercase u, which was found above the 7 key, I think it is, n minus 1, because you don't need to touch that. It's going to be the same every single time. And then you'd put times 0.8. Does that have to be in parentheses? No. Can it be in parentheses? Yes. And in fact, if you just put a parenthesis around it, you won't even have to put the times in there. And then the third line is, what is u parentheses n min? And if you translate this, if you think about what it's asking you, n min, you already said it was 0. So they're saying, what's u 0? And you have to, of course, tell it what you started with, 60,000. Do you get that that is how you would enter this scenario on your calculator? All right. So I want to know if you can figure out how to then go to the table and figure out for me what u sub 12 means 12 years later, what should my car be worth? All right, go ahead and grab your calculator now. For those of you that really wish you had a calculator in the room, I did bring some. So if you want to borrow one of these, you have to leave me your cell phone, which you can't be using during class anyway. And I would happily trade it for your cell phone. If you are the rare kid who does not own a cell phone, you can give me something else. But I need something good. Go, trade you.
I can't put my charger.
Perfect, right there. Having a hard time seeing, is it glare?
No, it's the fact that
It's tall
in front of just people.
Lots of people. You want to sit here?
Sure.
There you go. Now you won't have anybody in your back. All right. Yes. Okay. I always have this happen. People have trouble with their calculators. I encourage you to wipe your calculator clean. And that process is second plus 7, 1, 2. If you get into calculator issues, do second key plus 7, 1, 2, and it'll wipe your calculator to factory new, but your mode has to be reset then to sequence mode.
And then reading goes degree.
Actually, that won't matter for today, but I do think degrees is better than radians. I agree. All right, so if you're still having trouble after doing that, you can ask me about your calculator. You can bring it up to me, or there's a kid sitting next to you. Get this in your calculator, get the table up, and let's see if you can handle this. I'll pause for a second. All right, so U sub 12. Brody, what'd you get?
4,123.2.
Can anybody verify they got that same thing? Raise your hand if you did. Okay, cool. Is my car really only going to be worth $4,000 by that time? Well, it's hard to know. If it keeps going down 20% per year, then yeah, it could be worth only that much. But there are other factors that like mess with math equations that can make the math equations just wrong. Like, what if all of a sudden the price of cars goes up? Well, then the price of the used cars also goes up. It's not like this is just a fact. It's going to, for sure, in the real world, drop 20% every year. What usually actually happens is it drops a lot at the beginning because a new car is special. And after that first 1 year, it's a used car. So it drops a lot. And then in the real world, it still drops, but maybe not as fast. So you'd need a really complicated scenario to get a real world value of my car. The other thing that is crazy that you guys aren't ready for, nobody is that in just a couple of years, cars might actually be able to drive themselves. And mine's one of those cars that's got this system in it that theoretically could drive itself. If it can still drive itself, it will be worth way the heck more than that because people like something that drives itself. You can climb in the back and ride to work and sleep back there. It's a crazy thought, but my car could theoretically do that. In which case, all of a sudden, the value goes way up. So I'm just trying to say, math in the real world, it's complicated. You can't always just make predictions and say, this model is just going to work. All right, everybody go to slide 2 of the notes. U sub 1 is what you use when you are first doing these recursive sequences. But we're not using U sub 1 today. Why? Because on real world problems, we don't want to act like 1 year has gone by. U sub 1 would mean 1 year has gone by. We want to start our problems with U sub 0 because U sub 1 represents like the first year or the first term has gone by. You don't have to write this, but I'm just trying to remind you that's why we change it to U sub 0 because the first year hasn't gone by when you do U sub 0. U sub n represents any term. It's any random place, any term. U sub n minus 1 represents the term before it. All right, so when we see this, we're saying any term, that's what this means, any term, is given by the term before it times this. And I've already talked about this, so you already know. Is that growth or decay? Growth. What percent growth? 5%. This domain thing, you knew it had to be a 2. Because why?
1.
Because they have a 1 right there. It has to be 1 bigger than that. All this domain means is this does not work to predict the first number they gave you. You can't tell U sub 1 from it. You can only tell U sub 2. All right. Just looking at them. Is this one growth or decay? Definitely growth. This one growth or decay? Decay. How could I have told by looking at it? Look, that's bigger than 1. It's going to be growth. That's less than 1. So it's going to be decay. How much less than 1? 0.25. So then the decay rate is 25%. The way I like to say it is this. If I want to know what percent it grew, then write it as a 1 plus or a 1 minus something. Let me show you what I mean. Most kids would say, that's 400% growth. You're wrong. Make this into 1 plus something. 1 plus 3 would be 4, right? That shows you that if you multiply something by 1, it just stays the same. So it's 300% growth. Do you get that? See, if I had 1.06 here, you guys all could get that. 2 seconds ago, you were like 6% growth. Because it's what's more than 1 that tells you the growth. See this 4? If I break it into a 1 plus 3, you'd all agree that's equal to 4. So that's the growth. 3 is like 300% growth. So it's really common for people to go, yeah, my stock doubled. I got 200% growth. No, you didn't. If your stock doubled, then that means there was a 2 right here. And it would look like this. UN equals UN minus 1 times 2. Was that 200% growth? No. That's like 1 plus 1, which is 100% growth. I get how that can be confusing, but you'll be smarter than those people who go, I got 200% growth. You really ask them, so you say and you got 3 times as much as you had in the first place? And they'll be like, no, I have 2 times as much as I had in the first place. Well, then you got 100% growth. Because the 1 is just bringing back the original. When you times something by 1, it just brings back how much you had in the first place. That's the growth part. Okay? All right. Percent change. This is not the same as the common ratio. Let's make sure you get what common ratio even means. 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8. Okay, that one, would you agree? I just did geometric and I timesed by 2. Times 2, times 2, then 2 is what's called the common ratio. How could I have gotten it by doing something with the 4 and the 2? You could have done the 4 divided by the 2, and it would have given you the common ratio. Because see, here's the harder one. Let's say I have 7, and I times by 1.9. What is 7 times 1.9? $13.3. What is 13.3 times 1.9? 25.27. That is a very realistic question that we could say, here's your 3 numbers. What's going on? And pretty quick you'll go, well, I guess they're not adding something. They're multiplying by something. But we're not going to tell you it's 1.9. So how are you going to figure out that it's 1.9? That divided by that. Okay? All right, and if you want to make sure, then take this and divide it by that, and it should also be 1.9. And then when they ask you what growth was it, some kids are going to say 19% growth because they're going to get a little confused. 1.9 is the common ratio. It is not 19% growth. It is 90% growth. Because it's what's bigger than the 1. I would write it as 1 plus 0.9, and that makes it super clear. Whatever's added to the 1, that's the growth part. All right, so here's a typical test question. See if you can get it. This geometric sequence has many more terms. What's the next term? Because I told you it was geometric, you don't need 3. You can know this must be one of those kind that multiplies by. So figure it out. I'm going to pause for a second and give that one a shot. So this new problem that I just gave the kids is I said we started with $5,000 invested in stock, and that 20% growth, we're going to see what it does after 10 years. So I gave them this, said you'd have to write that on the test, and then they're going to put that in the calculator and figure out what U sub 10 is. All right, I think by now most of you have got it. Please raise your hand if you've got an answer. Okay, good. Almost everybody's got an answer then. All right, Alex Z, what did you get for U sub 10? 959. Raise your hand if you had that same thing. Okay, good. So, do you get how this could be useful in the real world? You could actually use this. Okay. Now, let's talk about decay. Sadly, the moose population in Minnesota, actually it's just recently rebounded, but it was a great example for many years of decay. We had about 4,000 moose in Minnesota. So everybody, here's a new problem. You're putting this in the calculator. 4,000 moose to start with. And it was dropping like 4% a year. 4% decay. If it had continued that way, how many moose would there have been in 20 years? And again, as I told you, it's actually, thankfully, stopped decaying so fast. There was many theories about what was going on. It could be of many different things. There's predation by wolves, and there's more wolves than ever, so maybe that's meaning that there's going to be less moose. There is theories about them getting this certain tick on the moose was making them sick, because they would find these moose that had these ticks all over them, and then they thought maybe the ticks were killing them. But anyway, bottom line, it's thankfully stopped decaying. All right. So how would you put this in the calculator? Well, the first thing is your n min, because it's a real world problem, you want to start with U sub 0, so it's 0. Then it's U sub n, and then you have a lowercase u, the n minus 1, it has to be a minus, not a negative key, and then times by 0.96. Now, if you did 1 minus 0.04, I think that's smart, because you showed it's always 1 plus or minus something. Do you have to do that? No, I totally get that's the same thing as 0.96. But if you want to write it this way, that's cool, because you have the decay built right into your formula. And then you go off, and I know a smarter way than going on the table, and I don't know if you do, so let me show you. I know you went to the table and you got the answer, but let me show you a different way. Everybody hit second quit and clear. Don't worry, it won't wipe your formulas out. If you just quit out of the screen and get a nice blank calculator screen, just clear your screen. Then type U parentheses 20. Do you get that means U sub 20 to your calculator? The same U from the 7. Do you get how that's faster than going to the table? And boom, you get the same answer. What is the answer to U sub 20? How many moose do we have?
We don't have half moose, those are perfect moose.
Was it 1768?
Yeah.
I hear that right? Okay, good. And I hear you, the decimal could be argued because these are moose, not like, I don't know, what can you make decimals of? Pizzas. So, all right. So, I think you got it. And now let's get to your Schoology quiz. And then you're going to get a decent amount of time to work on that. I did have some kids ask me questions about the Schoology quiz before we even taught it. I want to remind you that the last 10 minutes is when I take individual questions. I don't want to do individual stuff in the first minute because it makes everybody in the class wait. 30 kids waiting 1 minute means I wasted half an hour. Okay, so don't ask me questions at the very beginning of class. Wait till the last 10. Then I'll help you all you want. Okay. Numero uno off of said Schoology quiz. Becca, could you read me number 1?
For each sequence, identify the common ratio, whether the sequence represents growth or decay, percent change, and whether the change is an increase or decrease. And 150, 225,
Okay, 100, 150,
225,
225,
and 337.
337.5. Do you get that I could have done this after 3 terms? After 3 terms, I could know they weren't adding 50 each time. After 3 terms, I could have known, oh, it's a multiply kind. Divide that by that. And I bet you can do it in your head. What are they multiplying by? 1.5, very good. That is called the common ratio. Is it growing or decaying? Growing.
It just says R. Is that ratio?
Yeah. Thank you. R. Apparently it doesn't say CR, it just says R. R is the ratio. And it's the ratio is common every time, it's called the common ratio. But I would have put CR there, but it's okay. And last, not last, percent of change. Careful, it's not 1.5.
50%.
50%. Now, do they say how to write that, or do you think that it leaves it open that you could write 0.5 versus 50? Like, it might not be clear.
Why can't you just write 50 and then?
Because this is a Schoology quiz, and it might not have that in there. So I'm going to go check. I'm going to literally go look right now to see. But the teacher really should have, after that, showed you an example how to write it, because it isn't clear. 0.5 does mean 50%, and 50 also means 50%. And
it says enter as a percentage.
okay, enter as a percentage means it's not that one.
Well, it says percent change.
I hear you, but I'm just trying to say, we don't want to use 0.5 then if it said specifically enter as a percent. 0.5 is not a percent. That's a good question. We don't know if it's this or this. That's,
On the first section, there's no percent sign there, but on the second one, it's what our percent sign there.
oh, if it already has the percent sign, then we probably don't need that either. So there you go. I bet you it's 50, but I will double check it in a second. Wait, last part of it, the increase, the increase decrease is easy. It's increasing, that goes with growth. So there you go. Okay, now I will double check that answer on number 1 to make sure that you guys don't get like a bad score because it's and looking for weird ways to write 50%. I'm gonna double check it, but I would bet on 50. Got it. If they already give you the percent symbol, then yeah, you don't need that.